I should have seen the truth the night Celine asked me to fix her braid before the Queen's summer feast. She always asked me to set things in place when she planned to break something else. We grew up together inside the palace walls, slept in the same small room, shared our books and lessons and secrets. People called us mirrors because we looked so alike, same dark hair, same height, same soft smile when we tried to be polite. They saw twins made by chance. I saw the small tilt of her mouth when she wanted control. I saw how she watched my hands, my walk, my pauses, and how she copied them like steps in a dance. I taught her manners and music and how to stand before a crowd without shaking. I taught her the Queen's favorite flower and the old steps to a winter hymn. I did it because I thought we were a pair and would rise together. I did not know I was giving her a map to steal my life. That night I braided her hair in a crown and she asked again about the Queen's smile, about the small crease that showed when she hid a laugh. I told her, like I always did. She hugged me and called me sister in all but name. I slept warm with that word in my chest. I woke cold with a blade at my neck and a guard saying I was under arrest for fraud and theft. They dragged me from our door. Celine stood in the hall with tears on her face, begging the captain to be kind, saying she had tried to help me, as if our years had been charity. I told them to ask the Queen, to check the ribbon she gave me as a sign of trust. The ribbon was gone. In its place the captain held a page in my hand, or something like it, a clumsy copy, a false note that said I had tried to take another's place. By noon the story ran through every room. They said I lied about who I was. They said I used charm to trick the court. Celine never had to call me a liar, she only stood behind the Queen with her hair like a crown and dropped her eyes when asked if I could be trusted. The Queen did not hold a trial. She gave a quiet order to send me away before night. I left through the east gate with only the clothes I wore and the taste of iron in my mouth. I walked until my feet bled and then I kept walking because rage was a fire and I would not let it die. The first town gave me a thin bed in a loft and a job sweeping a tea house. I kept my head down. I listened when traders spoke of the capital. They praised the Queen's new companion, the girl who knew every old song and every small joy of the Queen's youth. They said she moved like music and never made a mistake. Of course she did. I had trained her to move like that. I had pressed her shoulders back and fixed her steps and placed the right words on her tongue. On a gray morning a caravan stopped by the tea house. The master wore a plain coat and watched people like a smith watches a flame. His name was Damon. He paid fair coin and spoke few words. Work hard. Keep your word. Share danger. Speak truth to him even if you lied to the world. When he heard me correct a trader on the proper bow for a border lord, he asked how I knew. I said I grew up near the palace and had eyes. He did not push. On the 10th day he asked me to sort a dispute with a scribe who kept 2 sets of numbers. I found the hidden marks and set the books right. Damon watched my hands and then my face. He said I had the look of someone trusted once who learned the cost. I said I had, and that I would not be fooled again. He said the road would grind me down if I held a stone that heavy for too long. I said I would carry it until I could throw it through a palace window and let the glass fall where it may. He did not laugh. Months turned to years. Damon's trade grew. He bought a house on a hill and a seat on a council and a river boat, but he kept the same plain coat and the same rules. He brought me from clerk to advisor, though we used other words in public. I learned the flow of coin and grain and news. I trained our runners to read a room and to leave before pride became a snare. I sent letters in clean hands and made maps that saved weeks of travel. Damon made sure I had my own room, my own purse, and my own voice. He never demanded my whole story. He waited. When I woke at night with the memory of steel at my throat, he said dawn would come and I was safe. When I made a small joke after days of quiet, he noticed and brought fresh bread because, he said, it tasted better with laughter. Little by little my breath stopped catching in my chest. One winter the river froze and we were stuck in a small town for a week. We sat by a stove in a warehouse, the world wide outside. Damon asked if I missed the palace. I said I missed the little ivy fountain and the way the queen hummed when she read old letters. I said I missed the sound of practice bells. He looked at me like he had opened a door and found the center of me sitting there on the floor. He said when I was ready, he would take me back, not as a servant but as someone no one could throw away. I said I would only go to end a lie. He said then we would, and we would do it clean. He did not offer to fight for me. He offered to fight with me. That mattered more than gold. In spring a partner wrote to say the palace had ordered grain and wine for the queen's birthday week. The city would be full and bright and busy. Damon set the letter down and looked at me without a word. I touched the seal and felt the old tide rise, rage and fear and something new. I now had proof of my past that no one had taken. A song the queen had taught me when I was small, a pattern I had stitched into a banner for a spring fair, a shallow scratch under the desk in the old study where I had carved my mark when I was 11. I had a new name I had lived with honor. I had a man who kept his promises. I told Damon I was ready. He asked what I needed. I asked for a seamstress who could cut a simple dress that moved like water and did not shout. I asked for rooms near the east gate, for a plain carriage with good springs, and for messages to 3 old staff who had known me before Celine learned to mimic my step. I asked for silence around my plans and noise around our trade so no one would ask why Damon's advisor wanted an audience at court. He said yes to all of it and asked for a list. We rode at dawn 7 days later. The road looked the same, but I did not. I had a straight spine and a calm jaw and a heart that no longer begged for a place. When the first tower rose in the light, my hands went cold and then steady. I thought of Celine's braid and the blade and the lost ribbon and the queen who had not asked a single question before she sent me away. I promised myself that if I stood before her again, I would bow as a woman who knew her own worth, and I would stand tall. The gates opened to carts and hooves and shouts. The old smell of stone and river washed over me. Damon's hand found mine for a brief beat, not to claim, not to warn, only to say he was there. I did not look at him. I looked at the banners and the bright sun on the square. I said in a quiet voice that she stole my face, my name, and my life, but she forgot who taught her everything. He said then let us remind her. We entered the city ready to start the slow, careful work. We would not rush. We would not shout. We would set small stones in the right places until her world cracked on its own. I would take back what was mine and build something stronger, and when Celine finally saw me, she would know the teacher had come home. The capital had changed in the years I'd been gone, yet the streets still bent in ways I remembered. The same fountain with chipped marble stood near the East Market, the same crooked alley cut between the baker's row and the spice stalls. But the colors were brighter now, the clothes richer, and the faces younger. We took rooms above a cloth merchant's shop, 2 floors up with a narrow balcony that let me watch the market without being seen. Damon handled the merchants himself, spreading the story that we had come to secure trade contracts for the Queen's birthday week. No one questioned it, his name had weight, and my presence at his side was taken for granted. It was the first shield in our plan. My first step was to see Celine without her knowing I was near. I learned from a market gossip that she now dined every 3rd afternoon at the glass hall with a circle of ladies who lived for court whispers. From the balcony across the square, I watched her arrive in a white carriage marked with the royal crest. She stepped out in silk the color of ripe peaches, her hair braided with gold wire, her smile measured and graceful. It was my braid. My walk. My voice pitched just low enough to be listened to without strain. I felt the burn of it in my chest, but I forced myself to watch without flinching. She looked smaller than I remembered, not in size but in presence. The kind of small that comes when a person is always on guard. She had learned to live in the role I built, but she had never made it hers. I could see it in the way her eyes flicked to her companions as if checking for approval. Damon came to stand beside me, his arms folded. You see her, he said quietly, not as a question. I nodded once. She doesn't see me yet. She will, he said. And when she does, she won't know where to step without you. Over the next days, I made my presence known to the right people. I visited the seamstress who had dressed me for my first Queen's feast and ordered a gown in deep green, a color the Queen favored in her early years but had not seen much since Celine's arrival. I purchased a few rare books from the old palace librarian, a man who still called me by my old nickname without realizing it. I sent polite notes to 3 council members who owed Damon favors, arranging brief meetings in public spaces where my face could be seen but my name would not yet be linked to anything more than trade. At night, Damon and I went over lists, guest names for the Queen's celebrations, seating arrangements, the order of dances. He had secured our invitation to the opening banquet with one of his contracts, but he left the choice of our entrance entirely to me. "You'll have one chance to make the first impression," he said. "Do you want her to notice you right away, or to notice the way others look at you before she does?" I thought of Celine's careful smile, the way she scanned the faces around her. She should see the change in the air before she sees me. The morning of the banquet, the city buzzed. The streets leading to the Moon Hall were swept clean, and musicians tuned their instruments on the balconies above. I dressed without haste, the deep green silk falling in smooth lines, my hair braided in a style Celine would not know. Damon wore black with silver trim, the mark of his station, and at his collar he placed a pin shaped like a crescent moon, a gift from me the year he made his first council seat. He offered me his arm at the foot of the stairs. "Once we walk in, there's no stepping back," he said. "I don't plan to." The Moon Hall glittered with 1,000 lights, each one mirrored in polished stone floors. The Queen sat at the far end, framed by banners, her expression calm as she greeted each arrival. Celine stood 2 steps behind her, as I once had, her face composed but her eyes watchful. She didn't see me at first. Not until the noble from House Aaron, one of Damon's allies, leaned close to me and laughed at something I said, drawing the attention of those nearby. Heads began to turn, eyes measuring me, and the shift in the air was exactly as I had planned, subtle but impossible to ignore. Celine's gaze found me across the hall. For a breath, she didn't move. Then her fingers tightened on the fan she held, the only sign that the mask had slipped, even for a moment. Damon's hand rested lightly over mine, steady and warm, and he guided me forward into the room. The Queen's steward announced our names, and though I wore a new one, I spoke it with a confidence that left no room for doubt. Celine watched me approach, and I smiled, not as a challenge, but as if I had never seen her before in my life. That, I knew, would be the first cut. The Queen's banquet smelled of spiced wine and fresh lilies, the air warm from so many candles burning in crystal holders. Damon and I moved through the hall at an unhurried pace, stopping just enough to exchange polite words with those who mattered. I felt Celine's eyes on me like the prick of a needle at my back. Every step closer to her was another reminder that I was not the same girl she had destroyed. When we finally reached the dais, I bowed to the Queen with the respect her position deserved, not the deep submission I had once given out of blind trust. She studied me for a moment longer than protocol required, her gaze sweeping over my gown, my posture, and the way I held Damon's arm. She welcomed us in the formal tone used for visiting dignitaries, and I thanked her in words chosen to sound perfectly neutral yet tinged with familiarity only she might notice. Celine was close enough now that I could see the tension in her jaw. Her fan moved slowly, too slowly, a sure sign she was thinking rather than listening. Damon spoke with the Queen's steward about his contracts, giving me the space to take in the room. Every noble of consequence was here, and each one would see how Celine reacted to me. I didn't need to confront her directly, not yet. My aim tonight was to make her wonder. We were seated 2 tables away from the Queen's own, close enough to be seen but far enough to give her no reason to speak to us directly. During the first course, I listened to the low hum of conversation around me. Whispers began before the second course arrived. A lady in sapphire silk leaned toward her companion, eyes flicking from me to Celine. A man from the outer provinces asked Damon how long we would be in the capital. Every time someone's gaze lingered on me, I could feel Celine stiffen across the room. She was trapped between pretending I didn't exist and trying to learn who I was without drawing attention. It was exactly where I wanted her, unsure. When the musicians began to play the first dance, I remained seated, letting others take the floor. Damon spoke softly beside me. "You could have had the opening set. Why wait?" I watched Celine rise with the queen for the traditional steps, her smile fixed in place. "Because she's playing the part one taught her," I said. "I want her to see me do something she can't." The moment came with the third dance, when the musicians shifted to an old court piece no one had performed in years. I stood, letting my gown sweep the floor as I crossed to the center. The steps came easily, they had been mine long before Celine stole them, and the hall grew quieter as people realized I knew every turn and gesture. When the last note faded, I curtsied with the precision of someone who had learned it in the queen's own hall. Applause followed, polite but curious. I glanced toward the queen's table and saw her watching me closely, her fingers resting still on the arm of her chair. Celine's smile was tight enough to crack. As I returned to my seat, Damon's eyes held a glint of approval. "That will be remembered," he murmured. I picked up my glass, feeling Celine's gaze burning into the side of my face. Tonight had been the first move. She still didn't know who I was, but she knew enough to be afraid. And fear, I reminded myself, made people sloppy. The morning after the banquet, the market was louder than usual, the noise sharpened by gossip carrying from stall to stall. Damon and I walked the main square under the guise of inspecting a shipment of silks. Every few steps, I caught fragments of conversation, someone wondering who the green-gowned woman at the Queen's feast had been, another swearing they'd seen Celine's smile falter when our eyes met. That was exactly what I wanted. Small questions planted in too many mouths to silence. Back in our rooms above the cloth merchant's shop, Damon unrolled a map of the palace district across the table. "Her routine is tight," he said, marking the points where Celine was most often seen, the gardens before midday, the Queen's council chamber in the afternoon, and the glass hall for supper. "If you want to unsettle her, you'll have to catch her in public, not behind the Queen's walls." I traced my finger along the garden path. "Then we'll start there. Somewhere she feels safe." That afternoon, I made my way to the palace gardens with a small book in hand, wearing a soft blue dress and no jewels. The trick was to look like I belonged without drawing too much attention, until the moment I wanted it. Celine was already there, standing by a fountain with two ladies from her inner circle. She laughed at something one of them said, but her laughter stopped when she saw me strolling along the path. I pretended not to notice her, settling on a nearby bench under a blooming pear tree. The two ladies exchanged glances. One of them murmured something to Celine, who shook her head and smiled tightly. I opened my book, though my eyes were on the water's reflection. Celine's voice reached me, carefully pitched so anyone nearby could hear. "It's strange, isn't it, how some people arrive in the city and suddenly think they're part of court?" I turned a page without looking up. "Stranger still," I said evenly, "when those same people forget the traditions they claim to have grown up with." The words landed like a stone in still water. One of her ladies blinked at me, confused, and Celine's grip on her fan tightened. She recovered quickly, smiling as if my remark meant nothing. But the seed was planted. By the time I rose and left, I could feel her eyes following me, weighing whether to approach me directly or keep her distance. That night, Damon returned from a meeting with a faint smile. "She's asking questions now," he said, pouring us each a glass of wine. "Trying to find your name. She's frustrated that no one seems to know where you came from." I took the wine, letting the satisfaction settle. "Good. The more she digs, the closer she'll get to the truth, and the more afraid she'll be when she finally sees it." Damon studied me over the rim of his glass. "And when that moment comes?" I met his gaze. "I'll be ready to take back everything." The Queen's birthday week brought more guests into the city than I had seen in years. Carriages lined the streets outside the Moon Hall, and every inn overflowed with nobles and merchants eager to be noticed. For me, the real stage would be the masquerade ball, the one night when masks allowed truths to slip through without fear of consequence. Damon had secured our invitations weeks earlier. He left the choice of my attire to me, only saying, "Make them remember you," without knowing why. I chose black silk trimmed with silver thread, a sharp contrast to the bright colors I had worn before. My mask covered half my face, its edge shaped like the curve of a crescent moon, a small echo of the pin Damon always wore. The night of the ball, the hall glowed with lantern light and music spilled into the gardens. I entered on Damon's arm, moving through the crowd at an unhurried pace. My plan was simple: outshine Celine in a way she couldn't copy, then let others carry the story. She arrived not long after us, wearing a gold gown that caught the candlelight, her mask a delicate weave of filigree. She smiled at the right people, laughed at the right jokes, but her eyes scanned the room in constant search. It didn't take her long to find me. I pretended not to see her. Instead, I stepped onto the dance floor as the musicians began a set from the old court archives, a piece no one had played since the Queen's youth. It was the dance I had once practiced alone in the quiet hours, perfecting the smallest turns. Now, every movement drew eyes toward me. Damon joined halfway through, his steps perfectly matched to mine, and the crowd's murmur shifted into quiet awe. Celine watched from the edge, her smile fixed, but the tension in her posture gave her away. When the music ended, polite applause turned to a few murmurs I knew would spread by morning. Damon leaned down just enough for me to hear him. "You've just made her work twice as hard to keep her balance." I glanced across the room to where Celine stood, her fan still and her gaze locked on me. "Good," I said. "She's not meant to keep it." That night, as Damon and I left the Moon Hall, I could already feel the ripple my appearance had made. Tomorrow, the whispers would start again, only this time, they would question not just who I was, but whether Celine had ever truly been who she claimed to be. By the next afternoon, the ripple from the masquerade had grown into a current running through every corner of the court. Merchants in the market spoke of the mysterious black-clad woman who had outdanced half the hall, and a steward I passed on the palace steps was already retelling the story to a group of younger aides. Damon returned from a meeting with one of his allies carrying the latest news. "Celine has been in the Queen's private study since morning," he said. "Word is she asked to speak about you without using your name." That was exactly what I'd hoped for, forcing her to acknowledge my presence without being able to define it. That evening, I positioned myself in the outer courtyard where the Queen sometimes took her tea. I was dressed in soft grey this time, blending in with the stone arches so my presence felt almost accidental. Celine arrived in pale blue, her expression composed but her eyes searching. She greeted the Queen and her ladies, but I saw the way her gaze flicked toward me between smiles. I waited until one of the ladies asked about the old rose garden near the southern wall, a place only the Queen's true companion would know well. Celine hesitated, just long enough for it to be noticed, then gave an answer that was charming but wrong. Before anyone could correct her, I spoke. "The roses were replaced with lilies the year after the great frost," I said lightly, as though recalling something I had read in a book. "Her Majesty had them planted because she said lilies remind her of her coronation day." The Queen looked at me sharply, not in anger but in recognition. Celine's smile didn't falter, but the color drained slightly from her cheeks. She quickly changed the subject, but the damage was done. Later, as Damon and I walked back toward our rooms, he glanced at me. "That was deliberate." "It had to be," I replied. "She built her place by wearing my memories. I'm going to take them back, one by one, until she has nothing left to wear." His hand brushed mine as we turned the corner into the lantern-lit street, a silent promise that I wouldn't be doing it alone. Celine's cracks were beginning to show, and once they started, I knew they would only spread. Celine lasted 3 more days before she made her first real mistake. It happened in the East Gallery during a quiet hour when most of the court was still at the midday meal. I had gone there on purpose, knowing it was one of her favorite places to parade visiting nobles past the old portraits. The wide windows spilled sunlight over the marble floor, and the air smelled faintly of beeswax and lilies from the nearby garden. She entered with two of her ladies and stopped short when she saw me standing by the portrait of the Queen's first hunt. For a heartbeat, she froze, her mask of control slipping just enough for me to see the flicker of recognition. She dismissed her companions with a wave, leaving us alone in the hall. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice low but edged with steel. I tilted my head slightly, studying her as though she were the one I couldn't quite place. "You already know," I said. Her eyes narrowed. "If you think you can come here and steal your place?" I cut in, my tone even. "That's not what I'm doing, Celine. I'm just taking back what you borrowed." Her breath caught at the sound of her name in my mouth. I stepped closer, close enough that she could see the truth in my eyes. "You've been playing me for years. Every word you speak to the Queen, every bow you make, every smile you give, it's mine. I taught you all of it. And now I'm here to remind you that the teacher always knows more than the student." Her composure wavered, but only for a second. "You should have stayed gone," she said. "I can make you disappear again." I smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "You can try." I left her standing there, her grip on her fan so tight I thought it might break. When I reached the far end of the gallery, Damon was waiting just beyond the archway. He searched my face. "It happened, didn't it?" I nodded. "She knows now." He didn't ask if I was ready for what came next. He just said, "Then we keep going." And as we walked away together, I knew the real game had just begun. Word of our gallery encounter must have reached her allies, because the next morning Celine tried to get ahead of whatever she thought I was planning. She arrived at the Queen's council chamber early, taking a seat at the Queen's right hand, her posture stiff but her smile polished. I entered moments later with Damon, carrying a small bundle of old parchment tied in ribbon. The chamber was filled with ministers, stewards, and a few favored guests. Every move we made would be seen, and I intended it that way. Damon took a place near the trade minister, leaving the center of the floor open for me. I greeted the Queen with the exact curtsy I had given her on my very first day as her companion years ago, a detail no one had told Celine because it had been ours alone. The Queen's eyes sharpened, just a flicker, but it was enough. I presented the bundle of parchment, explaining that Damon's archives had uncovered old letters and sketches sent to the palace decades ago. They were maps and designs for the rose garden in its original form, complete with a note in the Queen's own handwriting about the lily replacement after the frost. Ministers murmured. Celine shifted in her chair. The Queen glanced at her. "Do you remember this?" she asked. Celine's pause was too long, her answer too vague, and the silence that followed carried weight. I didn't need to accuse her directly, the room had drawn its own conclusions. Damon stepped in smoothly, offering to have copies made for the royal archives, making it clear this was not an attack but a contribution. The Queen accepted, her gaze still on me as she thanked us both. After the council adjourned, Celine brushed past me in the corridor, her perfume sharp and cloying. "Enjoy your little performance," she whispered. "It won't last." I stopped, turning my head just enough for her to hear my reply. "Neither will yours." That evening, Damon and I sat in the quiet of our rented rooms. He leaned back in his chair, studying me the way he always did when he was deciding how much to say. "She's losing her footing," he said finally. "One more good push, and she'll fall." I traced the rim of my wine glass. "Then we'll give her one she can't recover from." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine in a brief, deliberate touch. "You're close to winning this. Don't forget what comes after." I met his gaze. I haven't. The truth was, I had thought about it often, what life would look like once Celine was gone. But first, I had to finish what I started, and the next move had to be decisive enough to end her reign for good. Lanterns lined the streets the night the Queen called for a private audience. It was unusual for her to summon guests after dark, and I knew immediately this was the moment everything had been building toward. Damon and I walked the long hall toward the royal study, our footsteps echoing against polished stone. Two guards opened the carved doors, revealing the queen seated at a wide table, Celine standing at her right. The air felt charged, as if the walls themselves were waiting to hear what would happen. The queen gestured for me to step forward. "There are matters I must clarify," she said, her tone calm but edged. "Celine tells me there are questions about her place here." I kept my face composed. "There are truths that should be remembered," I replied. Damon remained silent at the edge of the room, his presence solid at my back. The queen leaned forward slightly. "If there is truth to be told, you will both speak it now. Tell me of my coronation day. Tell me of the moment the lilies replaced the roses in the south garden. Tell me the words I said at the winter feast the year the snows fell early." Celine's voice came first, confident at the start but faltering with each answer. She spoke of the coronation but stumbled over the sequence of events. She remembered the lilies but claimed they had been planted to honor a visiting duchess. She could not recall the queen's exact words at the feast. When it was my turn, I spoke each memory with precision. The gold-threaded gown she had worn at her coronation, the way she had laughed when the wind nearly stole her crown, the frost that killed the roses and her decision to replace them with lilies because they reminded her of her mother, the exact line she had spoken at the feast, "May our tables be as full as our hearts." The queen's gaze never left me, and when I finished, there was a long, weighted silence. Finally, she turned to Celine. "You have worn a mask well," she said. "But the truth cannot be worn forever." Celine's face drained of color. "Your Majesty, enough," the queen cut in, her voice like stone. "You will leave this court by morning. Your name will be struck from the records, your titles returned to the crown. You are banished from the capital." Celine's eyes flicked to me, burning with hatred and disbelief, but there was nothing she could do. Two guards stepped forward, and she was led from the room without another word. The queen regarded me for a long moment, then spoke more softly. "I owe you more than an apology. I owe you your life back." I bowed my head slightly. "All I ask is the chance to live it on my own terms." Her lips curved faintly, the closest thing to a smile I had seen from her in years. "Then take it." As Damon and I left the palace, the cool night air wrapped around us. For the first time since the morning Celine stole everything from me, I felt the weight in my chest lift. Damon glanced at me, his hand brushing mine. "It's over," he said quietly. I looked back at the glowing palace windows. "No," I said. "It's just the beginning." We walked on together, the city ahead of us, mine to claim again, only this time, I would never let it be taken from me.